Happy Sunday, everybody. Every Sunday, I go over my favorite off-meta picks of the week, and I'll be putting up all of these options on the poll so that you can vote for them for the next gameplay video on Saturday. I've got a couple other decks that I'm going to explore throughout the week that didn't quite reach the criteria that I use for these meta breakers. So all of these decks are above 60% win rate, at least 50 matches, and were successfully piloted by somebody into Mythic. So they're all viable options, right? And part of it, too, I just wanted to remark really quickly. Magic is largely a game of coin flipping, right? So similar to like poker, you're going to have bad streaks, you're going to have good streaks, right? And I think this can be particularly frustrating to people who, like, maybe you have like a 70% win rate for a really long time, and then you start getting closer, the algorithm kind of adjusts your MMR or whatever, and then you start getting closer to 50%. It can be a really frustrating experience. And I just want people to remember that, like, a lot of times you're just kind of waiting for a good streak to happen. And if you're a better player, you're going to hit more streaks more often than if you're making mistakes. But don't get disheartened if you're experiencing a bad run. I just recently had a pretty bad run for like 5 hours, and every deck I was playing was just not. I couldn't get a win to save my life. So just thought I would, if you're experiencing that, hang in there. It's going to be okay. So this one is a teamer control list. And this one is not doing the teamer landfall deck, although it has some aspects of that. Notably, it is a 78 card list, so breaking tradition a little bit here. And we do see a lot of the cards that are familiar picks in the teamer control space. So like we got Ill-Timed Explosion, the Memory Deluge, the Shigeki, and the Sky Turtle. So we do have this like ability to loop through our graveyard quite well. And we've got Doppelgang, and then we've got a couple of other things that we don't usually see. So like 4 copies of 3 Steps Ahead. We saw this being explored in Best of 3 as a one-of in teamer control, but definitely not 4 copies. Usually you see this more in like hard, just Azorius control. 1 Fading Hope for a little bit of randomness. 1 Strangle, and I imagine these Fading Hopes and Strangles are really to try to help against the mono-red matchup. We've got Turn the Earth, which is the anti-mill strategy for Azorius. We've got a Braid here for some artifact hate and some interaction against the mono-red prowess. Same with the Fires of Victory. We've got Terra Sunder, which we usually see in Golgari as a little bit of artifact and enchantment hate, and you can kick it to exile a non-land permanent instead. We've got Cornucopia, which we're seeing more and more in the 4-color, 5-color Atraxa decks, the domain decks. Ancient Cornucopia works really well in that multicolored space. Brotherhood's End is kind of like the temporary lockdown of the deck, good against Boros Convoke. And then we've got Burn Down the House for a little bit of later game Wrath. Invasion of Arcavios actually means that the sideboard here is relevant. So we have access to even more cards. And then we've got 4 copies of Roxanne, which kind of helps this 4-color nonsense, or 3-color nonsense work well together. And then we've got the Hornlock Whale, which again we usually see in Azorius control, can be used to bounce something and then is a big threat. And then Bonnie Paul, which we've seen explored in teamer control, like the Teamer Landfall combo deck, as a late game threat that we got in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Then we've just got a whole bunch of teamer fixing, and because we are running a 78 card pile, we've got quite a bit going on here. And so I won't go through each one of those. But then in the sideboard, the creator decided to run a variety of tools. So we can bring in an additional Doppelgang, we can do Silver Scrutiny for additional card draw, Titania's Command to create bears and pump them, also gives you some graveyard hate, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Devious Cover Up if we're up against like a mill deck for the Turn the Earth. And again, this isn't a best of 3 list, this is just best of 1, but it allows you can grab it with the Invasion of Arcavios. Witness the Future is one that you can, if you need to like dig to a useful thing. Also, just like the bigger list is going to make it harder to be milled out by Azorius control. And then we have 1 Negate that we can go grab. So very interesting list. You don't usually see something this unfocused. Usually see more of a 60 card list to hit that kind of criteria. And so this one was done by One Punch God, who we've talked about before, and might actually be a content creator. I'm unfamiliar with them if they are. But they went 33 and 21 for 61% into Mythic. Second up, I would like to talk about is Boros Humans. And this one's a little bit of a stretch, really, to call this one a meta breaker, because like Mono White Humans is one of the top performing decks in Best of One, and it has been for a long time. And I've talked about this one briefly about you can just run a Mono White Humans list and add Imidane's Recruiter. Technically, there was enough going on here that my little bot recognized it as an alternative archetype to. It didn't identify it as Mono White Humans, and it didn't identify it as Boros Convoke, right? So take this one with a grain of salt. It's not my best meta breaker, but it did go 85 and 42 for a total of 67%. This list was piloted by Closet Monster into Mythic, and the strategy, just really quickly, if you're returning to Magic and you have no idea what I'm talking about, this deck has been around for a while. It's centered around human synergies, so the entire deck is humans, which allows you to play the Secluded Courtyard and the Cavern of Souls for fixing. So the Imidane's Recruiter is pretty easy to cast. But Thalia is useful for disrupting their opponent's early interaction, and then Coppercoat Vanguard, giving everything Ward 1, helps protect those threats, or yeah, protect the Thalia, really. Lunarch Veteran allows you to gain life to stabilize against Mono Red Prowess. Some of the Mono White Humans list are running like Intrepid Adversary, which helps with the lifelink as well. This one is not. We've got the Sanguine Evangelist to kind of give you that board pump along with the Imidane's Recruiter. And then Knight Errant of Eos, you can end up convoking a Knight Errant of Eos very, very quickly in this deck. Not as quickly as you can with Boros Convoke and the Gleeful Demolition, which can happen as early as turn 2. But the theory is still there. We've got some Brutal Cathar for some removal, Warden of the Inner Sky with the being able to tap tokens. This one's not running the Novice Inspector, so this one is doing some things differently than what I've seen in the past. So this will be number 2. And the number 3 here is going to be Simic Toxic by Vano. And this one was 47 and 29 for 62%. And I actually have a buddy of mine named Sims MTG, who is a content creator on Twitch, who has been playing around a lot with the Simic Toxic deck for a while now, like months. And they definitely have gotten it to a pretty close spot. Now, they decided to run March of Burgeoning Mist to be able to get additional copies of Rot Priest so that you can then hit the Blue March to then phase everything out and like OTK, your one-turn kill your opponents by giving everything toxic in one burst. This deck is not doing that. This deck is leaning more into like safekeeping and royal treatment to negate your opponents targeting you, and then the combat research works particularly nice because then it makes it so that whenever it deals damage, you draw a card, and anything that targets a specific single creature, you can then copy it onto Ivy. So this then triggering your Rot Priest multiple times. And so this is still pretty good for, I think, against the control matchups. It might struggle a little bit against the mono red, but that's why we've got like the Fading Hopes and the Slip Out the Backs. And Malcolm is one that I haven't seen before. I'm really curious to see how it plays. And but I do think that, there's something clever here, and I do think that getting rid of the Blue March means that this might be a little bit more rotation proof, because we're going to have the Venerated Rot Priest, but we won't have the Blue March after rotation in August. And fourth one on the list, I'm going to cheat a little bit because I'm going to lower the criteria just a smidge. So this one's Orsov Discard by Galad, and went 115 to 83, which was a 58% win rate. But it was a large enough sample size that I felt like it was close enough. We can kind of round to 60. Just know that this one was actually shy of my criteria. And but this one, I've been bumping into it a lot on the ladder, and so I wanted to pilot it once and see how it goes, right? So this one basically is centered around nurturing Pixie being able to bounce back the Tithing Blade and like discard stuff. So this one doesn't look like it's running the Tithing Blade sacrifice that you can bounce over and over again, but you can do it with like a Virus Beetle. You can do it with your Hostile Investigator. And then you've got like this kind of black-white control shell where we're trying to leverage the discard into a classic attrition and then outvalue our opponent over time. We've got some big win cons like Shieldred, not Shieldred the Apocalypse, but just like OG, or not, I guess OG, but the new Shieldred. Virtue of Persistence for some removal and life gain, as well as some loops. Aclazotz also helps stabilize against the early pressure. Sorin giving the life linker. Liliana the Veil is really good against the other control matchups. We've got the Fortune Loyal Steed, which allows us to continuously bounce back like the Hostile Investigator, getting multiple ETBs. Sarah Paragon lets us play any of the mana value 3 or less stuff from our graveyard. Rite of Oblivion, we can flashback this and sacrifice our Hopeless Nightmare to trigger the Scry. The Tiny Bones joins up, then makes it so that our opponents discard cards, as well as the Skullcap Snail and the Virus Beetle. So we're attacking our opponent's hands, attacking their resources. And this one does have a sideboard, although I don't think there's any way to access it like the other one. But this one's got Bitter Triumph, Deep Cavern Bat, Gix, Rush of Dread, Elspeth's Resplendent, Gisa the Hellraiser, and Harvester of Misery. I assume that these are just ideas that the creator was thinking about. So remember to place your vote on the poll here on YouTube, and because I'm not doing the 50 match summary, or I might if I really like the deck. My point being, you don't have to worry about getting your vote done. The poll will extend longer than in the past. So I've been playing around with doing other smaller gameplay videos rather than the 50 match summaries, just to kind of, adjust my time commitment to doing this sort of thing. So I hope you like these sort of things. I do enjoy looking at these off-meta picks. I think there's a lot of room for creativity and interesting brew ideas that come from them. And then, of course, they're all mythic decks, so I know they're all viable options if you put in the time and effort. So with that, I bid you all adieu. I hope you all had a wonderful week. And looking forward to week 9 of Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So tomorrow I'll be going over my full meta review for best of 1 and best of 3 in Standard. And I'll see you then.